Powered by Riverside FM.
Welcome to Do Good Work Podcast, hosted by Terrell Strayhorn and Jaquan Johnson. We specialize in taking a deep dive into issues that truly matter. Each episode unpacks the challenges and opportunities facing today's leaders, from classrooms to boardrooms, offering insights that inspire real change. By redefining success, we're changing lives, empowering people everywhere to create environments where everyone feels a sense of belonging, whether at home, work, or school. So hey, sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, and join us as we explore the issues shaping our futures, one meaningful conversation at a time. Let's go!
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Do Good Work Podcast. Super duper excited about you being here. You know, this is the podcast where we tackle the issues that really matter in education, business, and community building. I'm your co-host, Terrell Strayhorn, joined in the studio by
Jaquan Johnson. Welcome back, everybody.
And we are delighted to have a conversation tonight with the one, the only Dr. Brian Laquanen, who we're going to introduce in just a bit. Of course, it's great to be with you always. And today we're going to talk about some really pressing issues, conversations that really matter when you're trying to do good work or do meaningful work in schools, workplaces, communities, colleges, all across the nation. We're going to dive into issues of resilience and mental health and how to help loved ones get the help that they need. And our expert in residence for the night, Dr. Laquanen, is going to take us there. So whether you are an educator, a business leader, a parent, a grandparent, a next door neighbor, just anyone who's looking to really get help or help someone who needs help, tonight's episode, there's something valuable for you in it. But before we dive in, of course, we're going to check in with you, make sure we see how you're doing. So for all of the platforms where we are live and streaming, feel free to drop into the chat where you're tuning in from, where you're listening to, and I'm going to turn it over to Jaquan, who kicks off our regularly scheduled game show.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you guys know who tune in regularly is that each week we like to start off the show with using the first letter of your last name to describe the day or week, your day or week. We're going to go turn over to you, Dr. Brian. What is your word?
Yeah, well, Laquanen being my last name. Good to be here, by the way. Thank you for both inviting me, Terrell and Jaquan. So my last name begins with an L, so the best way to describe how my week has been going is lively. There's been a lot of developments going on with me and a lot of new opportunities, getting back into things and so forth. So definitely lively is definitely the word to describe how my week's been going.
I like that, lively. What about you, Terrell?
I'm thinking for me today, I am going to say I am feeling rather, I was going to say strong, but I've used that word before and recently. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do simple. That's my word for the day. I'm feeling simple. Not in a simple, silly way, but it's been a productive week. It's been a productive day. And then today I was really, really productive. But I accomplished a lot of simple things like, emails that needed to be filed, invoices that need to be handled, organizing files on the screen. So I picked simple for the day. What about you, Jaquan?
Alrighty, I got to go with juicy. Only because I took some time to read the big, beautiful, magnificent bill in some eyes. So it was pretty interesting to, learn more, dive more into what's in that bill, what it means for really students in higher education. So I would say juicy.
All right. So we got Rhonda tuning in from Houston, Texas, where I am. Her word is gracious. Awesome. We got Linda with strong. Everybody, wherever you are, please jump in, drop your words. We would love to see them and place them on the screen throughout the episode. We truly appreciate all the participation. And so, I mean, we've got quite a bit to cover and never enough time. So be sure, those of you who are tuning in, listening in across all the platforms, grab your coffee, your notebook. You want to write down some notes from Dr. Laquanan tonight, I'm sure, and bring your full attention because we're about to have a really meaningful conversation. But before we duck into that, y'all know what we do. So Dr. Laquanan, one thing that we've tried to do as a team of people committed to doing good work is we realize that there are a lot of people out there who are looking for good work. Especially in today's time, those who were doing work and maybe at a federal agency and things changed overnight, or folks who were doing work with the kinds of groups that all of us on this screen have had the pleasure of working with as clients and students and so forth. And, you know, those offices might have been shuttered or the work might have been changed. So we know that your background as a psychologist, as a coach, as a therapist, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to get a job in those kinds of fields right now? Any advice, things that work for you, tips along the way?
In the field of what I do?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, definitely a lot of tough times right now. I've been having that same discussion that you brought up. I think it's a really important topic with a lot of my clients in terms of all the changes going on. As we know, there's a lot of things going around, not only just in our country, but worldwide. And so one of the biggest things I tell people is make sure you focus on the things you can't control. You know, a lot of times if we're focusing on the things we can't control, right, what's going on in the other side of the world, you know, what people are doing, people's attitudes, or how people act, you know, we get in some really tough areas. And so focusing on the things we can control, such as what we respond to, how much we take in, like the news, our attitude, our response, what we're willing to engage in, not engage in, is a great way to still maintain some self-empowerment. So I just want to highlight that as well, because it is want to validate the level of stress and uncertainty that's going on out there. But in terms of my field, first and foremost, yes, we always in mental health and even the healthcare arena, always needing providers, no matter what's going on in the world. As long as we have humans, we're going to need people to help care for humans, and especially in the mental health arena. Mental health conditions and concerns are at a really all-time high, and it's been around for a while, but definitely during the pandemic 5 years ago, we are still seeing the residual effects of the pandemic, and of course different types of issues going on, whether it be politically, globally. There's a lot. And so conditions or symptoms such as depression, anxiety, substance abuse are really heightened, and having an avenue to work on that and get help and treatment is critically important. So especially the field of mental health, there's no shortage of that. If any of you are interested in that, make sure it's, of course, a good fit for you, just like any other field of work. We have to make sure that it's something that's aligned with our skills and of course our passion. But yeah, if you're out there interested in becoming a part of this mental health field, which is very broad, whether it be a social worker or whether it be a therapist, a marriage family therapist, a psychologist, a researcher, we can definitely use more and more help.
Absolutely. I love it. We got Nicholas Hartlett. Hey, Nick, tuning in, and his word
Nicholas
is never ending. So, Jaquan, what advice do you have? Job kind
welcome,
of tips?
welcome, Nicholas. Welcome, Mama Linda. Good to see you both. I would say that I agree. Is that you need to just focus on what you can control. Don't worry about the things that are outside of your control. And one thing you can control is your effort and energy. I think that when you're job searching, you have to be prepared for the interview. You can be mad at the results if you don't put in the work. But just because you put in the work doesn't guarantee you the job either, right? But without hard work, you have really no chance to get in that job. So again, just doing your research about the company or organization that you're applying for, seeing how your skills fit the job description, and practice articulating how you can answer some of those questions that may come your way in that interview.
Yeah. You know what I would add to the conversation is certainly see if either of you have perspectives on it before we get into the main heart of the matter tonight, and that is, apply. I often tell students, clients, neighbors, friends, family members, apply for the job that you're interested in. And, don't just apply to everything. Apply to things that you really are interested in. You want to do that kind of work, and you believe that your skills match what they're looking for. Here's the real tip, though. If there are 20 qualifications or 20 tasks listed, and you can do 14 of them, 15 of them, you don't have something for every single one of them. Research is pretty clear that women and people of color, LGBTQIA2S plus folks, are more likely to screen themselves out of a job search before they apply than our peers. And so I remember one time I applied to this job. I really only applied because one, I was really interested in the job, but two, the application said at the bottom, if you are any of these groups, please apply. The research is clear that you typically screen yourself out of searches, and rather than screen yourself out, we encourage you to screen yourself in. And I thought, well, I ought to just apply because they told me so. So for anyone who's out there and you're considering a job, you're thinking you might make it, but there's one or two things you haven't had that experience yet, or you're not sure if your exact skill is transferable, I would venture to say, screen yourself in, apply. Let the screening committee, the search committee, do that vetting process.
Good advice.
Yeah. All right. Well, friends, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Brian Lequanin, who many of you will either know, have known. If you didn't know before, you're going to know him after tonight. He is an author and a board certified psychologist teaching families to get past their fears. He is a coach who encourages them to take action and get their loved ones the help that they need. So don't allow fear and the disease to hold you emotionally hostage. He's going to talk about it tonight. And then we're going to learn some essential skills and knowledge to take on the fight for ourselves and to help our loved ones. He's been seen in many different settings on lots of different channels, but we're delighted because you get to see him here tonight on the show. And without further ado, Dr. Lequanin, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing as well.
Absolutely. So we believe that you are doing incredible work, what we call good work. And we're going to talk about that work. But first, so that all of our viewers will know who this is on the screen, tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I am a licensed psychologist. I have my PhD. I'm practicing here in Southern California, originally born and raised in Ohio. And speaking of Kentucky and Texas, I got my PhD from Oklahoma University. And so from there, so I've been around Midwest, East Coast, got married in Boston, Massachusetts. And so I reside here in California. Been married for going on 19 years, and I have 2 young kids. But professionally, yes, I'm a licensed psychologist, licensed out here. Work a lot with clients across different settings. I've worked in substance recovery for almost 15 years. Worked with abused adolescents for quite some time. And also give a lot of talks on mental health through various organizations. I really enjoy putting myself out there in terms of the media, whether it be articles, news channels, podcasts, like what you're doing, and any other opportunity or posting media out there, mainly directed towards spreading awareness on mental health. And so a lot of what I've been doing recently is strategizing with a lot of families who have loved ones who are struggling with mental health and or substance addiction, and their loved one is refusing help, and they're in some level of crisis that if something doesn't happen quickly, something really bad is going to happen to their loved one. And so that's what I find there's a gap there, and how to communicate to your loved one, how to set healthy limits and boundaries, but yet still come from a loving place. So a lot of the intervention is not on the person who's struggling. Of course, that person has to do his or her work, but a lot of my interventions and strategies are geared towards the family unit minus the loved one, because if that family unit doesn't change, very little can be impactful for long-term change if that system that person's going to be involved in and re-enter isn't also growing and changing and in their own recovery.
Mm, wow, I love it. All right, let's get into it. You want the first question, Jaquin?
Yeah, you kind of touch on it. Is that you throughout your career you identified a gap in the work, or pretty much in the literature, and you kind of took it to task and wrote the book about how to get your resisting loved one into treatment. And in your book, you mentioned, I believe, 25 essential must knows.
Hmm.
Could you give us about 5 of them?
Five of
Talk us
them.
through them.
Okay. Yeah, and where those came, if I may back up, where this book came from was a lot of what I believe were the missing knowledge out there. And so, for almost 15 years, I've been facilitating a support group for family members who have loved ones struggling, and then I'd give talks in various venues, and these questions kept coming up over and over again, and my responses were the same, and I was like thinking, wow, there's a gap of knowledge of some sort. And so I started to ask people, like, is there anything out there? I mean, having been in this field and this field existing for some time, I thought there would be some information out there. And I was asking people, they said no, some of the things that we're bringing up, those are the information that we don't know. There's great resources out there, but it was, for example, a question like, well, we want to help our loved one, but he or she is talking about suicide, so we're too scared. Or they may leave home and be homeless, and we'd rather them be at home and safe, although they're drinking lots of alcohol and using drugs, but as long as they're not homeless on the street being trafficked or harmed. And so these must knows where I believe is the most essential knowledge and reoccurring questions and struggles that people have. And it's for anybody, whether it be you've been fully knowledgeable and a clinician and therapist and researcher yourself, or you're brand new to it. So no matter where you fall in that spectrum, I believe these are the most essential knowledge. And so, yes, 25 of them. One of the top ones that I talk about, and I think is the most important one, is you have to have hope, right? You have to have hope, because if you don't have hope, right, because just knowing the field of work that I've worked in and people who were really struggling at high level, they're able to get better and on track. And we hear it constantly. And the most important factor was that family system making those really critical changes. So you have to have hope, because if you're not don't have hope, you're not trying anymore. And we start to feel hopeless and helpless. But just know, because a lot of families believe that they've done everything. But doesn't matter. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of family dynamics, and I can choose that there's gaps in what they're doing and what they haven't been doing. So having hope is one of them. Another one, too, 3 words of why people use unhealthy coping mechanisms: substances, sex, drugs, money, power, blaming, and everything, is because it works, right? 3 critical, 3 words to summarize: because it's some way of coping. If you drink some alcohol to take the edge off, you're going to keep drinking alcohol to take the edge off. If smoking some marijuana helps lower your anxiety or social anxiety, you're going to keep smoking marijuana. What happens, though, is when we get dependent on something, it becomes counterproductive and dysfunctional, and we become dependent and maybe become addicted to that. And so we can't, maybe we'll talk about it later, but we can't minimize the idea, is because it works. And that's why so many people are scared to give it up, because they believe that's the only thing that does work. Okay, and another thing too, a third one, the reason why people struggle, right, and continually is because they can. you know, so, somehow, some form or fashion, people who love them are perpetuating it. Another word for that is enabling. Enabling comes from a loving place, but we were perpetuated. If someone loses their 5th job because they are too high to go to work and they're tardy, right, and we keep giving them a home and a place to stay, where's the motivation to work on that? And so if our loved one crashes their 3rd car because of a DUI, and we still give them modes of transportation, where's the motivation to work on that? And so people coming from a loving place, but they're going to continue to struggle because on some level they can. Some other ones is some of the worst places someone can end up is the best places. And I know as a parent, we would never imagine our young kids being homeless, in jail, wherever else in really dire straits. But sometimes in the work that I've done, some of those worst places are the best places where they're in a level of desperation to get help. And the last one, fifth one, is everybody in that family unit. And I always like to use a lot of metaphors, and one of them is a canoe. And let's say you have 5 people in that canoe. If you've ever rowed a canoe before, you know to maximize speed and distance is that everyone has to be working 100% on their share. And that doesn't mean everybody on that boat is equally talented, stamina, strength, but as long as a person is working 100% on their 1/5 of that share. And so that's one of the biggest things for family units as well. We always believe that the person who's caused the most harm is the person that has to do the most work. And that's not necessarily the case. Everyone who's still part of it has to have an all hands deck approach. So Jaquan, that's some of my 5 no's. There's 20 more out there. And so, but yeah, thank you for opening up with that.
Listen, the 5 are strong. I think the other 20 will be just as good. So again, that book is How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment.
Yeah. If I may say something real quick, because treatment, of course, is the formalized treatment where you go to a facility, but treatment is also to get your resisting loved one to just accept help, right? So treatment doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to facilities. Some spiritual beliefs have their own type of approach to dealing with these things, or some type of organizations or cultures. And so treatment can mean the actual process of going to a hospital, going to a residential treatment, going into intensive outpatient, but it can also mean how to get your resisting loved one to a place or a point where they can accept help.
Awesome. So in the book, trying to make sure that we have everything moving through here, you cover so much around substance abuse or different kinds of conditions that people might struggle with: substance abuse and anxiety, mood disorders. You have quite an extensive background in training in insomnia. So I thought maybe we pick that up for a second, since that's such a crux of your work. Talk to us a little bit about what is insomnia? Why do so many people sort of suffer from it? And what are some ways that people can start to get into treatment and be treated for insomnia?
So insomnia, generally speaking, according to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM for mental health conditions, insomnia is either difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, or waking up too early than your desired wake up time. Usually people think insomnia is just falling asleep. No, if you fall asleep fine, but you keep waking up 2 hours later and you can't fall back asleep, that's a form of insomnia. So you have to have one of those 3 symptoms at minimum, at least for a couple times a week for at least 1 month. Okay, so that's the typical, the most general way that insomnia is defined. And ways, there's a lot of reasons to which people struggle with insomnia. I mean, we're seeing it definitely heightened, especially over the past few years, because of heightened anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, a lot of uncertainty, job loss. And so insomnia can be triggered by various ways, and even some medical conditions can cause it. And so what I would recommend a lot of your listeners out there is to really, you can get a sleep study test. A lot of times we don't realize that we have certain sleep conditions. So in addition to insomnia, there's all kinds of stuff that happens during the night that we might not be aware of. Like sometimes people snore. People have no idea until their roommate, their partner, or whatever else says, "Man, you snore like a bear." I had no idea. Or you gasping for air, called sleep apnea, and people had no idea. And even people talking in their sleep until a bed partner. So really gather data information, whether it be a bed partner, a family member, but you also can get a sleep study test done where it monitors your pulse rate, your eye movement, and all these different functions to see if you are having disrupted sleep. And so treatment for it could be definitely talking to your doctor. Sleep used to be one of those secondary things on the list, like, oh, I'm coming to a GI doctor to have a stomach ache. Oh, doctor, I also have insomnia. Okay, we'll take some melatonin. But they're starting to realize that insomnia is up there because it can also be exacerbating or causing the other condition. If someone's not sleeping well constantly, that's going to heighten their anxiety and depression, fatigue, pain. And so they're addressing the insomnia, and research shows that insomnia, not sleeping well, is a significant predictor on substance relapse. They studied that with people with alcoholism who are checking into rehab, and they weren't sleeping well. Usually, when people relapse on a substance, they wouldn't come in saying, "Oh my God, I was sleeping great, everything was fine, I feel so rested, and I decided to relapse." No, I lost my job, my partner left me, my parents are in the hospital, and I was distressed. And so I resort to get relief, pain relief, emotional relief from my substance. So usually insomnia is not good. And lastly, with bipolar disorder, that if someone's not sleeping well, we want to address that very quickly because it can trigger an manic episode. So great topic. Anyone out there, insomnia is really important. Don't take it lightly, especially if you snore or you're gasping for air because you are not getting restful sleep, and it's damaging to you medically and psychologically.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in the book that, as you're sort of flipping through the pages of the book, you almost feel like you are, well, one, you're learning. I mean, clearly you're learning about knowledge of different conditions, picking up skills. And it's in that section around insomnia and sleep that you also introduced that you yourself practice mindfulness as a way of really, encouraging the body to calm down, to pace itself. So talk to us a little bit about mindfulness. What is it? And I don't know, is there any mindfulness practice you could teach us here?
Well, mindfulness, generally speaking, is, well, let me talk a little bit about set this up. Well, very generally speaking, anxiety is typically worrying about the future, things that haven't happened yet, things with a lot of uncertainty. Depression on a very general level is sort of staying stuck or lament in the past. But we forget about being present in the very moment. And that's where mindfulness techniques come in. So mindfulness is this broad umbrella that talks about how to be present in the moment. The World Health Organization identified 3 major areas for healthier living. It's diet, exercise, and mindfulness techniques. So mindfulness techniques, some of the tactics or tools or activities under the umbrella of mindfulness techniques are things like a meditation, guided breathing, a prayer, journaling, any of yoga, Pilates, a martial art, or taking a walk and engaging in all your senses. Those are all types of ways to be mindful in the moment. And so what happens is that's a great way to get what we call grounded. Usually if we're anxious, we're worrying about things, all our senses are heightened. And to be mindful is, how do I stay present in the moment? Because as I was alluding to earlier, that's what we can't control, right? We can't control things that are beyond us. And so that's one way to get grounded and focus on what we can control, is by being present in the very moment.
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of times we do focus a lot of our energy on what's happening, what the future looks like for us, and how can we plan for a brighter tomorrow and a bright future. And Terrell and I do a lot of work on students with disabilities, and some things that we found is both visible and invisible disabilities. And some things that we found through the literature and some of our own work is that many people view them as broken and need to be fixed. So speaking to family members and friends who may have someone in their lives who are going through anxiety or depression, how should they approach that individual?
So a family member who has anxiety or stress and trying to help their loved one who is struggling with a disability, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So great question as well. And I work with a lot of families, and whatever it may be, whether it be a disability or it could be a substance struggle, or it could be a mental health condition. I think one of the very important parts, one of the most important aspects of interpersonal connection is a concept called validation. So if you saw in my book, I call it the medicine for miscommunication. So validation means to acknowledge someone's truth. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Doesn't mean you have to believe them. You just want to acknowledge someone's truth. And a lot of times people don't feel like that way. And I think that happens a lot with generational gaps. You hear a lot of teenagers saying, God, my parents just don't understand me. or parents say they don't understand us. And so because we're not acknowledging someone's truth, and so way because I believe validation is the precursor to empathy. Empathy is to really understand someone's world. And so for like us, like Terrell wearing glasses, I'm wearing glasses, if I really want to empathize, we'll exchange glasses, and I'm going to really try to understand his world from his view. He'll try to understand my world from my view. And so that's what we don't do. And so and then sometimes with someone with disabilities, sometimes we're coming from a good place. Doesn't always mean we're coming from a good place is the right place or the best place. And we're not understanding their world. We have these expectations, or maybe they feel like they're struggling, or they're not as good enough because their other siblings are better. And so understanding their world and validating them, understanding what their truth is, and allow them to share in what their expectations are for themselves as well. But I think that is a really, really critical thing. Sometimes, like I said, when someone struggles, for example, with alcohol, like, hey, why don't you stop drinking? My God, you know what? You lost your third job. Why don't you stop drinking? And you get that language out there, right? Or, hey, gosh, this is your fourth marriage. Why don't you stop, doing this? And we forget it, and of course the person feels shamed, and they create a barrier, and sometimes acknowledge, like, hey, I want to help you here. There's a pattern going on here, man. Let's figure this out together. And so that's where validation comes. So that would be my biggest thoughts: is understand their world and hear what they're telling you and validate them. Really acknowledge their truth.
What I love about the book and your work is there's nuance to it. It's not like one dimensional where you're saying, although the book is clearly titled "How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment," you also provide advice and guidance to the family, as you said earlier, how the family has to structure and sometimes restructure. But I'm thinking about a particular case in the book where you're talking about, what you should do if you are afraid that by setting some boundaries, your partner or your loved one might inflict self-harm, right? And a lot of times the way people respond to that kind of condition is they say, oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to say anything. They give up their freedom, they give up their liberation, they give up their boundaries, they give up themselves. And your book says that's not healthy. Well, we know that's not healthy from a psychological perspective. Talk to us a little bit about that scenario and how folks can navigate it.
Okay, great question. I'm glad you're bringing that up. By the way, you guys are asking some great questions. You're really getting me to think. So this is good stuff. And I really appreciate that. You really seem like you really dove into it, and very thoughtful with your inquiries. So I really appreciate that. So, suicidality, and if you recall, I have a section on myths of suicidality. It's a really, really big topic, and the fear of losing a loved one is probably one of the biggest barriers to getting people the help that they need. And sometimes, unfortunately, in someone's sickness, they may be utilizing the fear of suicidality as a tool to get people to back off. And so I'm going to back up a little bit again, and I'm going to talk real quickly. I talk about disease, right? And so we call medical disease, diabetes, hypertension, Crohn's disease. That's a form of disease. Mental health disease, addiction, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, all those are a form of disease. But I like to generalize the disease is any entity that's been long-lasting and causes impairment in our life. So therefore, we have all our own version of a disease. That could be selfishness, that could be racism, that could be hedonism, that could be materialism, whatever it may be. We all have our version of a disease, and so we're all in some form of recovery. And so I like to look at this disease as this separate entity. It never defines any of us. There's a saying in the AA arena is that your disease is always in the corner doing push-ups. And our job is to keep it in the corner doing push-ups. What happens is we stop ignoring it and we don't respect its capabilities, and then it engulfs us and infiltrates us. So, but one of the ways the disease can do that is it's to instill fear. And I talk about the oil and gas of the disease is guilt and fear. And fear is one of those that keep families paralyzed, because the three inevitable consequences to untreated mental health or addiction is either when someone is just not getting help and they're getting worse and worse. The three inevitable consequences is people end up in jail, they end up in hospital, or they can lose their life. You know, homelessness is temporary. If they don't get help, they end up in jail, hospital, they lose their life. And that last one, the thought of ever losing a loved one, is really important and fear invoking. But I always tell people as well is that we take that very seriously. In matter of someone saying, you know what, you don't give me my car, I'm going to kill myself, or you know what, you break up with me, what's the worth living? Those are obviously unhealthy ways of thinking, and so we never take any form of suicidality very lightly. And so I talk about how to set some healthy limits and boundaries. For example, hey, you sound really hurt right now. I can't help you the way you do. Let's get you the help that you need. And so you're validating the person, and you're not provoking them, saying, well, if you really want to die, you would have done it by now. Right. Some people do say that stuff. I know sometimes we chuckle, but unfortunately there are people who respond that way, and it creates this barrier. Um, but we take it very seriously, but we have to accept. I don't think we can ever accept, me being a parent, that we can ever outlive our children. And I think any parent out there would validate that that's a very strong fear. But we have to accept it, not emotionally, but we have to accept the reality that your loved one can lose their life if they don't get help. And I've seen it before, like, oh, well, I know my daughter, I know she's upstairs taking Xanax and alcohol, but as long as she's not getting out there being assaulted or raped or kidnapped or trafficked. Or I know my son, I know he's in his apartment in college, and I know he's, not going to class and he's smoking a lot of weed, but at least I can text him and know he's there. That daughter can die upstairs at any moment, and it's going to be, the longer she stays in that state of being, the more at risk she has. Or the son in college can put himself in a bad situation as well. And so we have to accept it, the reality of it, but it's good. I don't think we can ever accept it emotionally, but that is what keeps families from taking the necessary steps.
Very well said. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up fear and guilt, and I think what I've heard you said before is in another podcast is that many parents will rather have their children drink in the household, smoke marijuana, but once that child becomes addicted, they begin to feel fear, or they begin to feel guilt, and you often ask them, like, was your intent for them to be addicted to that drug? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. Great. Yeah. And so I think if you came across it, there was, I like to bring up this story. There was parents that was coming because their 19-year-old child was addicted to marijuana and alcohol and other substances. And they first came to us and said, hey, Dr. Brian, we feel so bad because we think we got him addicted or her addicted. And we're saying, like, what happened? Well, when she was about 13 years old, she started talking about marijuana. She wanted to try it. And so since we smoked marijuana and growing up in the 60s and 70s, we thought, okay, well, if she's going to smoke marijuana, we might as well teach her the right way. So they smoked out with her, right? And she got addicted. And so I said, well, did you mean for her to get addicted? No. Did you mean for her to struggle in this way? No. So you have to release yourself from guilt. Were you trying to come from a good place? Yes. Was it probably the best place? Probably not. There's other ways. And so that is one of the things with guilt is to relieve yourself from guilt is to remind yourself, was my intention to harm the person? Did I make a best choice? Probably not. So we have to accept that. And the way you relieve guilt that I talk about is through the amends process. And so to amends means to repair. So if I was an alcoholic during my kid's life and I feel guilt about it, my job, my amends is to be sober. If my loved one, if I wasn't present, I didn't understand LGBT culture, and that caused them to be depressed or struggle emotionally, my amends is to validate them and understand LGBT culture, right? And so that's the way you make amends to repair, is you take contrary action to what the struggle was or to what got you in that struggle to begin with.
Amends. I like it. And is that a acronym? Have you built it out to be an acronym, or
Which
just the word amends?
Amends is an actual word. Amend means to repair, like to amend a policy. It means to change or to improve. And so, but in 12-step recovery, it's a step 4 called make amends. And
Awesome.
well, not make amends. Well, not there. It's later on. But when you do a self inventory and stuff like that, but later on to make amends to the people that you've hurt.
Great. So if you have questions for Dr. Laquanan, please feel free to drop them in the chat across the platforms, chats or live. And hot tonight. So I have a different kind of question for you, Dr. Laquanan, and that is in several of your online materials, your book, about the book, some of the shows that you've been on, it's clear, and you talk about this, that you have worked with, a very broad, diverse, demographically diverse set of clients. And, that's really informed your book, but as well as your work with communities. But, there's a lot of data and evidence that shows that people's perspective about therapy and getting help can be different depending on how they show up in the world. And so thought we might take some time with you to talk about, like, what have you learned have been some of those barriers to therapy or getting treatment, and how might we help those who need that help work through some of those, that sense of taboo and the things that really get in the way.
Yeah. And the first word that comes to mind is stigma, right? Stigma is this negative label, and that could be for various reasons. That could be a culture, that could be a certain belief system. And if I could say this, that what's positive trajectory that we're moving towards, I can speak for the United States, is we are in a good rate destigmatizing mental health. We see, whenever we see more people of different ethnicities, whether it be Middle Eastern, Asian, who generally speaking were averse to seeking mental health treatment for whatever their perspective was. We're seeing a lot more people present. I believe social media has been a great way, whether it be on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, people talking about their sobriety journey, their cancer journey, their anxiety journey. I think that's so empowering. And whenever a high profile person, whether it be the Demi Lovato's, the Justin Bieber's, the basketball players or athletes who come out of the closet or talk about their own suicidal depression, it has huge impact. It really does. And when Robin Williams passed away, I remember having a conversation for almost 2 weeks across all people, young people, older people, because of how impactful his passing was. Because number one, he was so culturally pervasive. He was Mork and Mindy. He was Mork and Mindy. He was Aladdin. He was the therapist in Good Will Hunting and Captain Hook and all those roles. And so he was so pervasive. But I think it was scary is because people said, well, God, Robin Williams, who is the top of the world icon, successful, rich, family and stuff, he was subjected to suicide. And so I think it really shook up to a lot of people is how safe am I if I am not at that caliber, and he is, and he gets subjective to taking his own life. But I think it sparked a lot of conversation. Dwayne Brady, if you know, a comedian, he talked about his own depression after Robin Williams passed away. And so stigma is one of the biggest things, but I see a destigmatization the more people talk about it. And so definitely therapy is designed to be a safe place to have conversation. And anybody out there, everyone has these different ideas of therapy and they're scared. It's designed to to have some scariness to it because you are unshelving a lot of scary things. And so make sure one of the biggest things you want to look for in a therapist is a good fit, right? And if someone makes you feel uncomfortable clinically, like, oh my God, they're talking about personal stuff, that not necessarily is a bad fit. That's a good thing. But obviously you want to find someone who's sensitive to where you're at and in line with your values and principles and so forth. But a working alliance and a good fit is critically important. But that's the great thing. Keep talking about mental health. And if someone shares about their mental health, people don't hopefully realize of how impactful that can be. That's why I love coming on these things. Is if it's one person, because that one person can maybe help another person, and that can just branch out far. And anytime someone talks about it, you definitely take away the stigma, at least to a great degree. So,
Yeah, love it. Thank you. I just know for myself, and love to hear from you, Jaquin, but growing up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, to two wonderful parents, wonderful grandparents, very Christian home. Um, I don't remember conversations around therapy or counseling. I mean, I had a
hmm
guidance counselor at school, but it was a different kind of counseling, right?
hmm
That typically any struggles you had or challenges you had, you prayed them away or you went to
hmm
church and talked to the pastor or something about them. But as an adult, I certainly, and that's why we want to talk about it with you and have it on the show, is that we do need to destigmatize therapy, counseling, help seeking, and normalize that, because as an adult who's a college administrator and a professor, I certainly have gone to a therapist, see a therapist periodically, and have found enormous value in just having a talking partner, a thought
hmm
partner, a place where I can safely download, and someone who can give me ways of thinking through how I'm feeling and helping me expand my vocabulary around my emotions so that I'm
hmm
not just mad or sad or up or down. There's
yeah,
complexity to it.
yeah.
And that comes out of counseling. So to anybody who's listening, and I'm still a man of faith, so I think I've been able to merge my Christian beliefs
hmm
with seeking help and therapy, and I think in a very healthy and productive way. What about you, Jaquin?
Yeah, I came a similar background, faith-based family, and we didn't have many conversations about, mental health therapists, what they do, what they don't do, how they are beneficial. It was really just, get on your knees and pray about it, and seek his guidance. And still today, I would do that, absolutely. Um, but I really, personally, I didn't start seeing a therapist until 2 years ago. But like Dr. Brian was saying, is that you got to find the right fit. I went to two or three before I found someone that
hmm
was, that we kind of gelled together, and he understood where I was coming from, understanding that I'm slow. It takes time to get to know me. It takes time for me to open up and share exactly how I'm feeling. And like you said, Terrell, he has helped me kind of expand my vocabulary rather
hmm
than just saying I'm just upset with how things are going. Um, yeah, I think that's been my journey with mental health. And I'll also add too is like running. Now I ran in college for a scholarship, right? So it was kind of mandatory,
hmm
and kind of fell out of love for running. But I picked that back up and realized that it has truly tremendously helped with, clearing the mind,
hmm
and kind of, just re-upping energy.
A great mindfulness activity as well when you're, because if you're jogging and you're being present in the moment, and so yeah, so I'm glad you picked that back up.
So in your book, chapter 6, it's called Flattening the Risk Curve.
hmm
And it's really your take on harm reduction techniques, which I learned about in my psychology program as well. That when complete abstinence or removal from the behavior is either not possible or a long ways off,
hmm
there's this belief that you can sort of reduce harm. So the examples I know that you draw on are things like when you're working with a client who might be a cutter or have cutting
hmm
tendencies, that maybe instead of using a sharp knife, you can use a dull knife. That, and the person who's using excessive alcohol, that instead of drinking some hard liquor, maybe you can soften the kind of
hmm
liquor that you might take in, the amount. So
hmm
talk to us a little bit about that chapter
Yeah.
6, flattening the risk curve, and your perspective on harm reduction. Where does it fit in the whole
hmm
treatment journey?
So flattening the risk curve actually was during the COVID times where they talked about flatten the risk curve. And so what does that typically mean is to flatten the risk curve was to lower your chances of getting COVID, right? And so there's a lot of risk factors. So risk factors are things, people, place, situations, things that put you at risk to what you're trying to avoid. And protective factors are basically the opposite, the things that will protect you from those risks. And so of course, back then with COVID, it was like wear a mask, right? Social distance, wash your hands, and all those other things is to lower that risk. And so I said, you know what? How can I implement that in my book? And so there's a risk factor. And so we have that curve, and there's a lot of things that put you at risk. So the more the risk you have, the more you're at risk for struggling. So things like for mental health or addiction is, of course, having access to a substance, right? Or being in a highly stressful relationship or toxic relationship, hanging around with old people, places, situations, things that were very counterproductive and unhealthy, or not minding your diet, insomnia, not exercising. All those things are risk factors. And so protective factors would be things that counteract those. For example, prayer, spirituality, taking care of your mind, body, spirit, your social health are all things that will protect that. That to flatten the risk curve. And so is it ever going to be completely gone? For example, with anything, with COVID, can you whatever you do, can you still possibly get it? Yes. Or anything else. A heart attack, right? If you had high cholesterol and you changed your diet and got medicine and you're no longer at that high risk, is it always going to be somewhere